أعوذ بالله تعالى من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين، على حبيب قلوبنا وعظيم نفوسنا أبا القاسم محمد. الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا، وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، وخلقناكم أزواجا. صدق الله العظيم. In Surah 78, verse 8, Surah An-Naba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how He created us, the human beings, in pairs. And I wanted to take this opportunity in the month of Muharram and share a series of lectures based on marriage and Islam. I hope you enjoy the content of these lectures and find it informative. So let's start our journey for this month. Whenever we start the discussion of marriage and Islam, we can't avoid the elephant in the room, which is Islam's view on polygamy, or limited polygamy, as the number of women a man can be married to at one time is capped to 4 wives. It is imperative that we have this discussion in our majalis and educate our community on the topic. In my personal experience over the years, I found that this is a very sensitive topic and it's under-discussed, and it's either presumed to be controversial or taboo. So we're not discussing these issues in our majalis. Thus, we are leaving our community, especially our young ones, to be ignorant, and we leave them guessing, to read in between the lines about the subject. In addition, when we interact with our non-Muslim friends or co-workers, we're always faced with the questions about how could we revere a man like the Prophet Muhammad, who had multiple wives. We know that the number could be from 9 to 12 to 14 wives that he had. I know that I have personally been faced with this question during an interfaith dialogue with my Christian and Jewish friends, also during school or professional leadership discussions. People are always asking me personally, how could I be a feminist and still revere a person like Prophet Muhammad who had multiple wives? So I wanted to take this opportunity and have a discussion about this issue so we can share the knowledge with all the listeners over the next few days, Islam starting with the pre-Islamic era of prophets and marriage and their wives. I wanted to start with some of the arch-prophets of shared Judeo-Christian Islamic religion who we revere and count as the fathers or the founding fathers of our religions. Prophet Noah or Nuh, we all agree that had multiple wives. There are some narrations that talk about at least 4 wives, some talk about more. The Quran mentions definitely one of the wives who was a disobedient person and her son who were taken at the floods. However, we know that he had other wives, at least 3 different wives, who had the 3 different sons known as Sam, Ham, and Yafth. And they were from 3 different races or ethnic backgrounds. And that's why today in the world we have the Caucasian race, we have the African race, and then we also have the Middle Eastern or the tan colored people in the world. So the tradition of having multiple wives or polygamy predates Islam, and other prophets have been known to have multiple wives, yet they are revered and there are no questions to their acts of polygamy or taking multiple wives. Prophet Ibrahim or Abraham alayhi salam is the founding father for Muslims and Judaism, and we know for sure he had at least 2 wives, Sarah and Hajar. And some narrations actually mention a 3rd wife for him as well. However, we know with Hajar he had Sayyidina Ismail, who is the great grandfather of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And on, from the side of Sarah, he has the Prophet Yaqub and Ishaq, and they are the lineage that leads all the way up to Prophet Jesus or Isa alayhi salam. So again, we have a prophet who is an arch prophet of all three religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and he had followed the tradition of polygamy or taken multiple wives. However, we seldom see anybody questioning Prophet Abraham's morality because he took more than one wife. So here we see another arch-prophet of Judeo-Christianity and Islam, Prophet Jacob or Yaqub alayhi salam, who had multiple wives. We know through narrations that he had three or more wives at least. We know this through the tafsir of Quran when we read Surah Yusuf, and through other narrations that Yusuf and Benjamin were from a different mother. However, the older brothers who tried to actually kill Prophet Yusuf were through different mothers themselves. The story also highlights hatred and how that is a learned behavior, and we could pass it on to our children. And you see this interesting fact kind of gets highlighted in the story, as we know that the mother of Prophet Yusuf and Benjamin was supposedly Prophet Yaqub's favorite wife, and she passed away young, and he mourned her loss for a long time. So the other wives got jealous of this lady because although she was gone, she still held a high place in Prophet Yaqub's heart, and they passed on this hatred or animosity that they had towards this lady to their children, and the children now felt that animosity or hatred towards Prophet Yusuf to the point where they later on try to kill him when they leave him in the well. Also, you see this beautiful reunion happening between the brothers who are kind of lost and are getting reunited after so many years because they have the bond of having shared mothers. In Egypt, in the palace, when towards the end of the story they are being reunited, you see that this story actually always reminds me of a parallel between Rasulullah and Imam Ali and their parents, because Abdullah, the father of the Prophet, and Abu Talib, the father of Amir al-Mu'mineen, actually had a shared mother. That's why you see always the bond between the Prophet, Abu Talib, and Imam Ali being really, really strong because they had this shared family or kinship. You don't see any of the other uncles having that kind of love or bond with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Thus, when Abdullah's father, Abdul Muttalib, passes away, the grandfather of Rasulullah passes away, Rasulullah actually goes to Abu Talib and stays with him, although he's not one of the richest people in his family, because he has this bond with him. Prophet Moses or Musa, one of the other arch prophets of the religions, has also been known to have multiple wives, although one of the wives is the one that's always highlighted, which is Safura, the daughter of Shu'aib alayhi salam. But we know through our traditions and actually mentions in the Bible and the Old Testament that he had at least three other wives. And there is another really interesting parallel between Nabi Musa and his wasi or wali that he leaves behind, because Aaron, his brother Harun, who was supposed to be his successor, actually dies in his lifetime. So he assigns Yusha bin Nun to be his successor. And as after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, his successor is not given the mantle of leadership, and actually one of the Prophet's wives go into battle to raise her army against the wali of the Prophet. The same thing happened actually with Nabi Musa's successor and one of his wives. So definitely an interesting parallel here. Prophet David or Dawood alayhi salam is known also as the king of the Israelites. He's the man who fought the Philistine Goliath and really established the kingdom of the Israelites. And he is one of the most popular kings or prophets of Judeo-Christianity. He's known as a man of wisdom and power, and yet he had many wives, and the numbers differ based on which book you're reading that we will explore in the next slides. If we look at the Book of Kings, which is the ninth book of the Hebrew Bible, or the 11th and 12th books of the Christian Old Testament, this states that Prophet David, or King David, had 700 women as his wives and 300 concubines in his palace. So he had about 1,000 women that he was either married to or had access to as wives um, in his lifetime. Yet he is uh, still a revered figure in Judeo-Christianity, and nobody has ever questioned the wisdom or the character or the morality of King David or Prophet David. We know that some sources actually within Judaism differ, and they say that he only had 18 wives. Some they go down actually to even just lower them down to 9 wives, and that is because even in Judeo-Christianity, although they allowed polygamy, they said that the number or the cap on the number of wives at a time has to be a small number, so the king or the ruler of the time can actually focus on ruling his kingdom and guiding his people and not be caught up with the pleasures of this world. And some of the wives that are mentioned is Michelle, the daughter of King Saul, Miras, her older sister, Hinoam of Jezreel, Abigail, the Carmel, Maacah, the daughter of King Talmai of Geshur, Haggith, Abital, Agla, and Bathsheba, the daughter of Emil. So now we must examine the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam and his wives and his marriage in the light of Islam and Quran and hadith. And to do this, we look at Surah Sad, which is Surah 38, or verses 18 to 26. Because in Islamic thought, we have difference of opinions when we examine the works of the Shia Ithna Ashri scholars and the Sunni, the Ahl Sunnah scholars, and examine and compare what we believe versus what's written down or is passed on in the Judeo-Christianity accounts. Not just the number of wives that he had, but also the controversial story about his marriage to Bathsheba, the possibility of adultery, or even going to commit the crime of actually trying to kill her husband to marry her. So let's explore in the next slides. First, we'll explore the story of Nabi Dawood and his marriage to Bathsheba from the view of Ahl Sunnah, and the works I'm going to use today is Jami' al-Bayan and Ta'wil Ayat al-Quran by Abu Ja'far Muhammad bin Jarir al-Tabari, also known as Tafsir al-Tabari, the foremost or foreknown scholar of Ahl Sunnah. These works are also used or referenced in the works of Suyuti, another scholar of Ahl Sunnah. The traditions, the three main traditions he uses are the traditions of Wahab bin Ibn Munabbah, Hassan al-Basri, and Anas bin Malik. And the story somehow explains that Nabi Dawood was a very pious man. He was busy in reading the book of Psalms or Zabur, and Shaitan distracted him by becoming or changing himself into a very beautiful bird which came and sat in his windowsill. And Nabi Dawood saw this exotic bird and got distracted, and he put away the book of Psalms and tried to follow where the bird was flying to. And as he came to his window, he saw his like into his neighbor's house, and he saw a woman actually coming out of the bath, and she was in the nude, and he was fascinated by her beauty. And when she saw that Nabi Dawood actually has seen her in that condition, she tried to hide herself or cover herself by putting her hair all over her body, and that fascinated him even more, and he became attracted to her. He later found out that this is the wife is of one of his generals in the army, and he was so infatuated or affected by the beauty of this woman that he actually wanted to marry her, but with her husband being alive, he couldn't marry her. So he sent a missive to the commander of the army saying that this woman's husband has to be sent to the front lines. So he was kind of planning to get that guy killed so he could marry his widow. And at first, he sends him to the front. He survives the battles. Then he sends him to even more dangerous war fronts until the man is actually dead. And after the mourning period is over, he marries Bathsheba, and he facilitated this marriage by actually contriving, um, conceiving or planning the death of this general who was fighting in his army. And that is what's known as the Dhanb Dawood that we talk about a lot of times in our du'as, or you see a reference to it in, a lot of different places where we're talking about the prophets and maybe, one of their sins or something. And they came up with a number of the wives that he had as being 99, as one of the verses in the previous slides we're talking about, because they're saying that the translation of the verses that he had 99 wives, and this army general only had one, yet he still wanted that one wife to add to his 99 to make them 100, and he wouldn't spare his brother or his general, thus one woman. To explain the story of Nabi Dawood and his marriage to Bathsheba, I want to use this beautiful story that comes to us from the narrations about our eighth Imam, Imam Rida alayhi salam, when he was in the court of Al-Ma'mun, and he had gathered people from different religious backgrounds for the great debate. They were people of Jewish origins, Christians, Magians, Sabians, and all different kinds of people. And they were asking the Imam all different kinds of questions. And one of the men named Ali bin Muhammad bin Jahm came to the Prophet and actually, came to the Imam and asked him about Prophet Dawood and the tafsir of these ayats, and told him kind of the story that I had repeated earlier about him being distracted by the bird, then looking at the wife of his general Uriah bin Hanan, Bathsheba, being in love with her, and then planning the murder of her husband to marry her. And upon listening to this story, the Imam actually smacked his forehead and said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He thought that this is really the great musibah in the world of the Islamic world and the world of Muslims, where we lower our prophets to the degree that we believe them to be of a moral character, of lower than an average man, that they would plan and commit the murder of a fellow man just to marry his wife. And once that man saw the reaction of the Imam, he asked the Imam, if this is a mistake, could you please explain to us what is the real story? And the Imam explained the story thus. So the Imam starts explaining the story in two folds. First, he started the story of Bathsheba and her marriage to Nabi Dawood and her husband Uriah. So he said that in those the times of Nabi Dawood, the woman, if her husband had died, regardless if it was a death in battle or in his deathbed, she was not allowed to marry ever. If once you're married, your husband passes away, you cannot ever remarry. She had to stay on her own for the rest of her life. And by marrying this woman, the widow of Uriah, Nabi Dawood had a mission, or a philosophical or strategic mission, that he wanted to change the traditions, the cultural norms of his people. So he was in split from the dogma or what the people believed, and he did something different. That's why it was maybe controversial at the time and people talked about it. However, turning it into either adulterous affair, or that he contrived and he planned the cold-blooded murder of her husband, those are things that have been added much later on as a conspiracy against the Prophet himself. And we as Muslims, or at least Shia, we believe in the isma, or the infallibility of the prophets. So we don't believe that story, and we believe that he actually only married the widow of this general after he passed away. He had no active role in planning his murder. He was never distracted by the bird and, didn't see the wife naked. These are all made up stories. On the second, explanation, which talks about Dam Dawood, or in the verses where, in the previous slides when we saw in Surah Sad, it talks about Nabi Dawood actually, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. What was that about then? So he told him that actually, if you look at the verses before that he's asking for forgiveness, it talks about how the Nabi Dawood actually was, since he was a king, he was also a judge in his time, and he would deal with people's, problems. So if people came into him and kind of presented a problem, he would have to render judgment. And as such happens, where two people would come in, and then, he was actually performing his prayers, he got disturbed, and he just quickly went over to listen to what was going on. And this one person just told him that one of us has transgressed upon the other, therefore judge between us with the truth, and to do and guide us into the even path. So this is my brother, for him are 99 ewes, and for me there is one ewe. But he said, hand it over to me, and he prevailed in discourse. And that's the ayah number 38. I'm sorry, the ayah number 23. So when he was faced with rendering judgment with these people, he made the decision hastily without asking evidence of, has he wronged you by asking you for the you to be added. He just went and told the person, why did you not accept against one of the others? This was his wrongdoing, that he hastened to the judgment. He did not take the time to reflect upon it, or, in terms of passing judgment, there was a procedural error. And because he made that error, which is tark al-awla, but not a sin, he actually asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. And after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him that, he's forgiven, and he kind of explains that in the verse by telling him that he's making him a khalifa on his earth, his vicegerent. So we know that there is no sin that's being committed but tark al-awla, because the nabis or the prophets don't commit sins. And inshallah, we'll continue the discussion from here in tomorrow's session. I hope you find today's session informative, and tune in tomorrow. For references, see the next slides. Thank you. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.